Good morning and welcome to the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission Active Transportation Forum. I'm Leanne Cheney, an active transportation planner for SPC, and I'll be facilitating today's forum, which is being recorded. We have a full agenda, so rather than go around and do introductions, I'd like to ask that you enter your name and organization or community that you're with in the chat box. While folks are doing that, I'd like to share some organizational news. In the event you haven't already heard, our current executive director, Vincent Valdez, is retiring at the end of the year, and Rich Fitzgerald will be moving into the role in early January once his tenure as Allegheny County executive concludes. Second, as many of you know, SPC went through a reorganization a couple of years ago. At that time, we created a new department called the Office of Strategic Initiatives and Policy and moved our active transportation program under that department. We're still evolving. Just last month, we tweaked our organizational structure, and the active transportation program now comes under our Transportation Demand Management, or TDM program, which is managed by Anthony Hickton. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Anthony to those who don't already know him and have him start us off with a brief intro and summary of our TDM program.
Good morning, everyone. I believe I do know most of the folks in the room, but for those of you that don't know me, Anthony Hickton, I've been with the SPC for a little over 5 years now, and I'm the manager of our TDM program. TDM is the use of strategies to inform and encourage travelers to maximize the efficiency of our system. And it leads to outcomes such as improved mobility, reduced congestion, and lower vehicle emissions. So the work that Leanne does in active transportation fits right in with that definition and that description, and also helps to evolve additional safety measures by the use of hopefully planning and programs with all of the projects in our region. We're really excited to have her. It's been my pleasure to work with her for these past 5 years. I have nothing but the highest level of respect for her, and I am excited. So thank you and welcome, Leanne.
Thanks so much for that, Anthony. I'm really looking forward to working with you and Julia to advance TDM and active transportation throughout the region. See where we're at on the agenda here. Next on the agenda, we have Jeff Rigner from Kittleson Associates scheduled to present on Complete Streets policy development. I don't know if Jeff has joined yet.
I am here, Leanne.
Okay, great. Awesome. So I'll stop sharing, Jeff, and you can take it from there.
Thanks very much. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
That's great.
Leanne, thank you for the invitation to present today. I really appreciate it. I will talk today about developing policies for complete streets. My name is Jeff Rigner. I am a senior principal of Kittleson and Associates, based out of the Philadelphia office, doing work across Pennsylvania and really throughout the Mid-Atlantic. In addition to my day job, I'm also the chair of the National Complete Streets Coalition. So I've been involved pretty heavily in development and implementation of complete streets policies for more than a dozen years, including a lot of locations. The one in the SPC region that I've worked on was the city of Pittsburgh's provided some technical assistance to Department of City Planning and Public Works before DOMI even existed, actually, as well as award-winning policies for Reading and for Howard County, Maryland. So just to give you some background, a lot of the presentation content that I'll share today comes from the technical assistance work that I've done with the National Complete Streets Coalition. So you can take a look at completestreets.org, and I'll have more on resources as we get toward the end of the presentation today. So we should start out with the definition. Really, what are complete streets? Some of you are probably deeply into the idea of complete streets. Others have heard the phrase but aren't necessarily sure what it is. So just for consistency, we want to say that complete streets are streets for everyone, no matter who they are or how they travel. So for every mode of travel, for people of every age and every ability. A complete street does not necessarily include every element that you see here from this example from Charlotte. This is bike lanes and generous sidewalks and, enhanced crosswalks and bus stops and what have you. In many cases, that's appropriate to have. In some cases, there are contexts where there are different types of facilities to provide. And I just want to show a few examples of what complete streets can look like. This is Pottstown, Pennsylvania, in Montgomery County, where a 5-lane road was restriped to 3 with bike lanes and additional parking spaces. In some cases, it consists of repurposing an outside lane to create parking space, bike lane, and curb extensions to shorten crosswalk distances. In other cases, including places like Pennsylvania that do not have palm trees, median islands can be very beneficial in terms of allowing pedestrians to cross one direction of travel at a time. Complete Streets policies, therefore, are documents that provide for all of these users, people walking, biking, riding transit, or driving. These policies ensure that the entire right-of-way is considered for all users throughout the entire project lifecycle, from initial planning through design, construction, and then finally operations and maintenance. And these policies really make the needs of all users the default for everyday transportation planning practices. Traditionally, what we've often done, and in many cases, unfortunately still do, is provide facilities for people walking, biking, or using transit if there's proof of demand. But in many cases, our streets are such that people aren't comfortable walking or biking there now, so you can't prove the demand. A complete streets policy reverses that burden of proof. So you assume that people are going to use those modes of travel unless proven otherwise. What are some of the benefits of doing this? Well, really fundamentally, I think complete streets is about freedom of choice. Surveys show more Americans want more freedom to choose how they get around. They feel they have no choice but to drive as much as they do, and many of them would like to spend less time in the car. And some people need complete streets. 1 in 12 households in the US does not have access to a motor vehicle. So they can't drive places even if they want to. There need to be options for them to be able to travel. 20% of people who are age 65 and over do not drive, and the percentage of Americans age 65 and over continues to increase as baby boomers age. And of course, children under the driving age, depending on where you are, don't drive. And there's a lot of potential to make a difference here. Those of you who are involved in estimating travel demand and mode shift probably know this already, but 50% of trips in the US, according to the National Household Travel Survey, are less than 3 miles, something that a fit person could bike if they have a facility to do so comfortably and safely. 28% of trips are less than 1 mile, which is a pretty reasonable walk. But most of these trips are driven. Let's talk about some of the specific benefits. So pedestrian scale, or this type of scale, is safer for everyone. As you can imagine, in this kind of circumstance, cars are driving more slowly. So not only are they better able to avoid crashes, but when a crash occurs, the severity of the crash is likely to be greatly reduced. And we could spend an entire 20 minutes if we wanted to on the impact of speed on safety. But suffice it to say that if you're a pedestrian who's struck by a car going 20 miles per hour, it's certainly not going to be a good experience for you, or really even for the driver. But the likelihood that you're going to die from your injuries is very, very low. That quickly increases to 40 miles per hour, where it's quite likely that a crash like this will be fatal to the pedestrian. And we find, too, that these incomplete streets tend to be unsafe, especially unsafe for people of color, people with low incomes, and older adults. So safety is a big benefit. There's a benefit to people with disabilities. There are nearly 20% of people in the US who have a disability. Some are highly visible, some are not. And better sidewalks make a community more accessible for everyone. There are special benefits for children. More than a third of kids and teens in the U.S. are obese, 2/3 are overweight, and this type of weight gain brings a higher risk for all sorts of issues, not just in childhood, but as children move into adulthood. There are also mental health benefits. The ability for kids to be able to walk and bike gives them independence at a younger age. And studies have shown that being physically active helps kids learn and improves their mental health. Kids who walk and bike to school tend to perform better in school. His health benefits extend to adults, of course. 60% of Americans are at risk for diseases associated with inactivity. I am a professional engineer, and so I cannot give a presentation without a detailed graph that no one can read. In all seriousness, I'll explain everything that's here. The red line shows a descending from left to right of the percentage of people who walk or bike to work in a particular state. There's a whole list of states at the bottom. And the jagged blue line going up from left to right is the percentage of population with diabetes. And so you can see, even though you can't necessarily prove causation, there is a clear correlation between greater physical activity and lower incidence of chronic disease. Every state that I present this wants to know where's my state. So here's Pennsylvania. A little better, somewhat better than average in terms of walk and bike mode share, in many cases driven by the larger cities in the state, and more or less middle of the pack in terms of chronic disease. We also find, too, that many regular transit users meet their minimum physical daily activity requirement just by commuting. So they don't need to spend the time or money on going to the gym or doing other activities to stay fit. There's real economic benefit as well. I'll give just one example. There are many potential to give. This is in the lower Central Valley of California. This is Lancaster Boulevard. That's what they call it in California. This reconstruction project went from 5 lanes to 2 with a large central plaza. It was a large public investment. It was about $12 million, maybe 10 years ago or so. Huge growth in businesses, new jobs, a vacancy rate in this downtown that was struggling a little bit before this project happened of 4%, which is just unheard of, and a doubling of sales tax revenue in the area. The economic benefits also extend to families. So for most of us on this call, transportation is the second largest expense for our families in terms of car payments, insurance, gas, maintenance, all of the other associated charges. But those are relatively fixed costs per car. So low-income households can actually spend more than half of their budget on transportation. And the ability for a network of complete streets in a town to allow a family to drop the expense of a car can really be their route out of poverty. There are also environmental benefits, and you're going to hear more about climate benefits later on today, but fewer emissions, less noise pollution, less pavement. So there are a whole list of benefits, but the bottom line is if you're in a community who is considering a complete streets policy, you need to think about what benefits matter most to your community and really structure your policy around those things. Now, a couple of things before we get into the details of policies. Complete Streets is not one very special street project. Lancaster Boulevard is an example of one very special street project, but it's done in conjunction with a number of other smaller improvements around the city. So if your town is one street, it's very narrow between the river and a mountain, and you really want to focus on that street with one great project, go for it. Otherwise, really think about a network approach. Complete Streets is not a design prescription. It is not a mandate for immediately retrofitting everything in your community. It just means when you do a project in your community, you do it the right way. It can be accomplished with any number of funding sources that are available to communities in Pennsylvania. And you need to address other things like land use, environmental concerns, and as we'll be hearing about, transportation demand management. I'm often asked to can you just give me a cross section for a complete street and I'll go ahead and fit it in? That's not how it works. And we'll talk a little bit about context in a moment, but every community has different needs. Every street has different needs and different demands. Some streets will benefit from having all of the above: sidewalks, bike lanes, transit facilities. In some cases, you need to make some hard choices about how to reallocate the right of way to decide which of those modes is most critical based on the context of your community. So let's get into the policies themselves. This is where complete streets start. I'm a AICP planner and professional engineer. I worked on projects for a long time before I realized the importance of policy in really setting up all of the planning guidance and design standards and all the things that we use as practitioners. So this is really important. As I mentioned earlier, policies ensure that the entire right-of-way is structured for safe access for all users through all levels of the project lifecycle. A lot of communities have found benefits from these policies. There's 1,600 of them across the US. They are across all types of communities. So whether you're on this call representing a city, a borough, a township, an MPO, or the MPO, a county, there is an opportunity for you to consider a complete streets policy. And we could get into more detail. I'm happy to take questions about this, about what a policy looks like, what kind of document it is. In many cases, communities just do this as part of the mobility element of their comprehensive plan. In some cases, it's an executive order or resolution from a mayor or borough council or township supervisors or what have you. And occasionally it's a more detailed document. This does not need to be something that is huge and in depth. If Sam is still on the agenda later today, when she talks about WalkWorks, she'll probably talk about technical assistance that's available for these types of policies. So it's well within the reach of any community in the SPC region. The best way to make sure that this policy is successful in terms of its development and in terms of its implementation is include everyone in the tent. Make sure that members of the community, elected officials who are going to be making decisions and committing dollars, as well as other agencies, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, everyone should be involved in the policy development process, because only then is it going to be successfully implemented. So let's talk about the top 10 elements of an ideal complete streets policy. This is all from the Complete Streets Policy Framework at completestreets.org, so you can delve into this in as much detail as you would like if you're interested. I'm just going to go through the 10 elements quickly and then wrap up before we take questions. The first element is vision. And this is not cookie cutter. This is something that comes from the community. What do you want from your streets? What will consistently rally support from leaders in the community? In some cases, that's going to be economic development. In fact, a lot of cases in communities that are not currently growing or even shrinking, they're looking for transportation investments to bolster economic development. In other cases, it's safety. Maybe there have been a round of crashes in the community that have been tragic, and it's galvanizing community action. It really depends on what's important to your community. The second is to make sure that underserved communities are served well. So traditionally, a lot of underserved communities have received less investment or investment in types of things like highways that have not benefited the communities directly. So an ideal complete streets policy really considers a range of needs and the importance of planning and designing for everyone. The third element is to consider all projects in your community and all phases of projects. So even going to something as small as major maintenance, like repaving, the Pottstown example I gave earlier was done as part of a repaving project. So changing that from 5 lanes to 3 was almost free. They were doing the repaving anyway. They had to put the stripes back. They just put them in a different place. There was some cost in adjusting some signs and signal heads, but in all, it was a really great opportunity for for redoing the roadway. And certainly in terms of larger projects like reconstruction or new construction, ensuring that those streets serve all users is critical. There should be clearly defined exceptions to any policy. If they aren't clearly defined, then all of a sudden exceptions become the norm. There are three typical ways that exceptions are incorporated. One is where user groups are prohibited, like freeways, for example. People are not allowed to legally walk or bike on freeways. Where cost is excessively disproportionate to need, where restriping a bridge, for example, might be reasonable cost. Widening a bridge to accommodate a sidewalk might mean completely tearing down the bridge and rebuilding it. And documented absence of current and future need. So think about largely rural areas that are protected from development that you are sure are not going to get any pedestrian or bicyclist traffic. Bear in mind, even through places like state parks or state forests, there's often some traffic, so at least a minimal shoulder is useful for people who are walking or biking. And ultimately, exceptions need to have some type of formal management approval. Number 5 is coordination. Many agencies have a stake in this. In Pennsylvania, it's largely municipalities and PennDOT. MPOs and counties certainly play a role in the planning process for sure, but they don't, in most cases, except for a few cases in Allegheny County and in Montgomery County, don't often own roads. So it's really important to create the best partnerships that you can among agencies, have all agencies involved in the development of the policy as well as its implementation. Design guidance, last version of the agenda I saw, you're going to hear shortly about updates to GM2 for PennDOT. So there are a lot more tools that are available now for these types of improvements in Pennsylvania than there ever have been before. There are 2 documents that are really worth looking at. One of them is national. It's called Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares by ITE. It's not design standards per se, but it provides some guidance for how the thought process can work in evaluating alternatives. It's really useful. And the one on the right is kind of an old chestnut. It's about 15 years old now. The Smart Transportation Guidebook developed by PennDOT and New Jersey DOT. Both are available online. Land use planning is critical. Streets need to be designed for the context in which they're located. They also need to actively involve the people who use them and live nearby. Performance measures are especially important because you need to decide what you want out of your community. And you make that a reasonable list. The city of Reading, which I mentioned earlier, had something like 30 different performance measures in their policy. And as a result, they aren't really measuring anything. If you have half a dozen carefully crafted and chosen performance measures, you're in good shape. Ensure that complete streets, especially those in underserved communities, are prioritized when you're deciding on your transportation investments. And finally, most important is implementation. Make sure that you maintain momentum after preparing your policy. Make sure that some committee, like the one shown here, is responsible for oversight, and report back regularly to the public to show what you're doing. It doesn't have to be fancy. A page or 2 report once a year saying, here's what we accomplished and here's what we're doing next year would be just fine. And finally, some resources for you to consider. If you go to smartgrowthamerica.org/bestcompletestreets, you'll be able to see what elements are included in the Best Complete Streets policies as they were rated earlier this year. You can look at a webinar that gives you a little bit more information on those. And if you want to delve in depth, look at completestreets.org, click on the blue box that says Tell Me About Complete Streets Policies, and you will find all you need to know. With that, I am happy to take any questions.
All right, we'll give a few minutes for that. I'm sure people do have questions, Jeff, and thank you so much for this presentation. I feel we're very fortunate to have a presentation from an expert on Complete Streets policy with us today.
You're welcome.
And I'm looking through the chat box. I haven't seen a question yet, but I did see a comment that NACTO design guidelines are another great reference.
True.
And I would point out also, while we're waiting for some questions, In the SPC region, we do have 12 communities that have already adopted complete streets policies, one being the city of Pittsburgh, which was an ordinance, and then the other 11 are by resolution. So we're making some progress there. All right. Not hearing any questions coming in. Again, thank you, Jeff. And we'll move on to the next presentation, which is an update on WalkWorks by Samantha Pearson with the PA Downtown Center.
Thanks, Leanne. I'm going to try to share here. Let's see. Okay, so that's showing you everything. Can you?
We see it as a PowerPoint,
Right.
not a slide presentation.
Is it now a slide presentation?
Yes.
Great. Okay, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to everyone today. And it's really great to hear from Jeff. I was excited to hear his presentation, and he really sets the scene. So I'm actually going to skip through a bunch of my slides and on to more meaty stuff. My name is Samantha Pearson, and I work for the Pennsylvania Downtown Center on a collaboration with the State Department of Health called WalkWorks. And I'm here to talk about active transportation and the things we're doing to improve that, and how we want to work with you to make as many places in Pennsylvania as possible safe, inviting, and welcoming for people walking, biking, using wheelchairs, and accessing transit. And our goal, our funding is from the Department of Health. So our goal is public health through injury prevention and reduction of chronic disease, and also community vitality, really helping our communities to thrive. So like I said, I'm going to skip through sort of these things because he already talked about all of this stuff, and go to what we actually do. So the different categories of support that we provide include a mini grant program to develop active transportation plans. We also provide technical assistance both in conjunction with the mini grants and also more generally to people who have already done mini grants, to people who have done their own plans on separate fashions, to people who are just interested in promoting active transportation in general, people considering maybe doing a grant, a planning grant in the future, all sorts of stuff. And in the course of that, we also just promote active transportation everywhere and anywhere we can. It's letting me advance. And when I say everywhere and anywhere, this is a map of where we've worked to date. There's a lot of different kinds of flecks on the map. And actually, if you're really keen, you'll see that there's sort of some missing flecks as well. But this is showing a range of different activities that have been done with WalkWorks funding over the past 10 years or so. We have worked on active transportation plans everywhere you see these black diamonds. We have worked with communities on policies, at least, community right in here has done active transportation plans and policies as well, Smithton and Scottdale. And then we have new grantees this year, and we are also now starting a capacity building program. You'll also see there's a lot of little teeny circles, and those are places where historically we've worked on developing walking routes and groups, including quite a few in the SPC region. It's okay, and then it does. So I am pleased to announce we are releasing our 2024 WalkWorks grant round schedule. It is on a new calendar from in the past. We're trying to align with fiscal year for the Department of Health. And so in this coming year, the funding opportunity announcement for the WalkWorks planning grants will be released January 10th. We'll do an informational webinar about that February 7th, and registration is already available for that. Applications for WalkWorks active transportation plans planning grants will be due March 22nd, and we plan to notify the awardees at the beginning of June. And the idea is they will then have from the beginning of June of 2024 through the end of June 2025 to do their active transportation planning process. This is, on the one hand, aggressive, on the other hand, doable. So, we're there to work with you along the way. When I am announcing that to people here on this call, there's a wide range of people. It depends on your role in a community. You may be in a position to actually, work with a community, get an application started. You may just be in a position to encourage municipalities to apply. Eligible applicants do include municipalities, so boroughs, townships, cities, also counties, and potentially MPOs, typically on behalf of a municipality. That said, in addition to encouraging or promoting the pursuit of active transportation planning efforts, once they get going, or for the ones that are currently happening right now, you might be in a position to help out with those steering committees for those ongoing processes. That could either mean literally joining the committee directly or just providing input when asked, whether as a part of general public input, surveys, or as a key person interview. So again, I'm not going into detail about the active transportation plan for this year, but it will be largely similar to in past years. Our level of funding is slightly larger, but not massively larger. Like I said, the details will be available in the funding opportunity announcement in January. In addition to the active transportation planning program, which has now been running, this coming year will be the 8th round, we have also started this past year a new program called Capacity Building Pre-Planning. And what this is about is getting communities ready to apply to do active transportation plans. So if you know of a community that you would love to see working on this, but they are sort of baffled by the requirements of applying for a grant, maybe almost any grant, but for our grants, we do expect communities to have work to develop a scope and budget that's appropriate to their project. We expect them to have done some initial education and outreach where they're communicating with interested parties and collecting indications of support, letters of support. There are these various steps that you have to go through simply to develop a reasonable application. And so the capacity building pre-planning program is a smaller program that communities can apply to get help with all of those things. So we are working with several communities this year on this and hoping that they will apply in the coming round for active transportation planning funds. In the coming year, we will release a funding opportunity for the capacity building pre-planning. It'll be a smaller application. It'll be due in May, shortly after that, and then we'll award we'll inform the awardees in July. Then there'll be basically a 6-month or so process where we will assist them with doing everything they need to do in order to be able to apply for an active transportation plan the following year. Our current awardees are, we do a site visit. We, just sort of talk them through the process. We assess where they are currently and really try to tailor the process to them. This program also does come with a small amount of funding. There's a $3,000 award, and it only it's a cash award that's not reimbursement is provided at the end of the process if you've done all the steps that are expected of you, but it is largely expected to go towards one element, which is this consultant assistance on scoping and budgeting of your process, which is something that is very challenging for many municipalities to do effectively. So I do want to mention, so when I talk about technical assistance, WalkWorks provides that assistance, like I said, to grantees directly, and also just broadly to try to just lift the capacity and awareness and understanding of the community at large. So we have a wide range of material available. We do a newsletter twice a month. We do these mini grants I was just discussing. We provide resource lists, templates for development of planning resources like mapping and things like that. We can do a lot of different presentations. We've offered webinars, for example, on Safe Routes to School in the past, and we have one coming up later this month about children's cycling education and traffic gardens. We have done an active transportation summit for the state in 2022, and we're doing one again in 2024. And you know, it sort of goes on from there. We have something on here listed as microfleet, where we actually have a mix of bikes, trikes, and balance bikes, a wheelchair, a white cane, so that we can sort of work with communities where they are and help them understand the needs of their residents in terms of a wide range of potential transportation options. When I talk about resources, this is just a pile of information, but these are the kinds of things we collate. Just what is going to be relevant to you? What do you need in terms of design guides if you're starting to think about, working with active transportation on your roads? We have a similar list, like Jeff was talking about, for creating complete streets policies, for example. This particular page has sort of a few things listed here for funding, and then we have other longer lists of funding. This is a compilation actually from last year about funding opportunities, looking at a range of scales of funding. So I point this out because we talk about planning grants, and we are on our list of planning grants, but we're actually a relatively small resource. We don't have a huge amount of money, and our grants are not that large. But we figure we are making up for that by providing a lot of technical assistance. At the same time, we are also heavily encouraging people to, if they already have the capacity to handle the grants, to both apply for them and manage them. We encourage people to pursue other grant sources, whether it's things like the statewide local share account, which has incredible flexibility for what it can be used for, or the new federal Safe Streets and Roads for All program. I keep calling it new. It is at this point, though, a couple of years old. That is an amazing way to access huge amounts of funding for planning. It won't be only devoted to active transportation, but it is devoted to improving road safety for all modes. So the scope is going to be bigger than a WalkWorks grant, which it's primarily focused on active transportation and may even be more narrowly focused. For example, it could just focus on couple of key corridors, or it could focus on a Safe Routes to School or Safe Routes to Parks plan, whereas Safe Streets and Roads for All is going to be assessment for all modes, including motor vehicles, of your larger network. I also want to point out this is literally a heady time in active transportation or transportation funding in general. There are new resources popping up all the time. For example, in our newsletter, there is more than I can possibly fit in there. I have not put this, for example, in there yet, but it needs to get in there. There's a new resource sheet from Federal Highway Administration talking about complete streets funding and listing just, a litany of potential programs. Now, not all of these are specific to active transportation, but many of them, at least 6 of them on this list are. And then these are just one part of what's available when it comes to technical assistance. That there are even programs that aren't on here because they are technical assistance and not strictly speaking funding. So the Thriving Communities program, which was for which the letters of interest were due last month, is a new and exciting way for communities to figure out how they are going to move forward with transportation infrastructure improvements in their community, and ideally looking at all modes. So I want to sort of wrap up and just remind you that we're thinking about, these sort of pie in the sky, big dreams, but we're also working on the basics, like making sure there's bike parking at the grocery store, and raising the awareness and visibility of our crosswalks, and looking for ways to have little cut-throughs in our communities that make them a more networked and connected place for people walking and biking. I encourage you to sign up for the WalkWorks newsletter, help get word out about the upcoming schedule for the WalkWorks planning grants, and start exploring who might be interested in the capacity building pre-planning. And then I'll also note that we're involved and appreciate a public eye on the Pedestrian and Pedal Cycle Advisory Committee for the state. That organization has its next meeting on next week, actually. And in general, we want you to be like the Lorax and speak for the streets and the people in them. So I think that wraps up what I wanted to talk about. And I'd be glad to take questions if there are any.
I have a question. Actually, I guess this question is for both Sam and Jeff. So I've been involved in multiple municipalities and their active transportation plans and complete streets policies, and it's sort of like you got to strike when the iron's hot. Usually, there's like a council person who's really enthusiastic about this, and they get moving. I was wondering if you guys could talk about if there's like a good tactic in terms, and both the planning and the policy play together. Wilkins Township, for instance, did both. Do you guys have any thoughts on like what should come first, a complete streets policy versus the active transportation plan? Should they work on it, try to work on it together at one time? Vice versa, et cetera. Just wondering if you can hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, I'd be glad to take a stab at it, and then maybe Jeff will take on too. From my perspective, this is a cycle, and so we are. There is and it's not in this particular presentation, although if I hunt through my slides, it's probably up there somewhere. Basically, you're moving between planning, culture, and policy, and all of these things feed into each other. No matter where you start in the cycle, you're going to keep moving around the cycle. So as we create better infrastructure with planning and construction, you then have a culture that is more devoted to active transportation, or you have a culture that's more devoted to car transportation. That feeds into policies that are also more related to car or active transportation, and it goes around and around. If you start with policy, then you can do planning. If you start with planning, then you can do policy. You're going to know one thing you do will be the final thing you do. So everything is going to get revisited ultimately.
As expected, Sam's answer is pretty much spot on. I would caution you, don't necessarily get wrapped around the axle of terminology. An active transportation plan can very easily include a page saying it is our policy to include these types of facilities on all streets, on all capital projects within our municipality or county or what have you, and provide a few more specifics. And in effect, you have the policy as part of your active transportation plan. But then, as Sam said, it's never going to be complete. It's going to keep growing. You're going to need to continue to build that culture.
Thanks.
All right, great. Any other questions for Jeff or Sam? All right, then. Thanks so much for that presentation, Samantha. And moving along on the agenda, we'll next hear from Keith Johnson with Gannett Fleming on PennDOT Hub 13 design manual, which is a nice flow. We had policy planning and now design. So when you're ready, Keith.
Okay, thanks, Leanne. Let me make sure I'm set up here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Oh, I sound great. Thanks, Leanne. So, all right. And can you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. Keith Johnson here with Gannett Fleming. And how this came about, Trish Meek is on the call. We are currently working on pedestrian design chapter for PennDOT that falls under what we call Hub 13 DM2. Then we get to that in a second. We presented it to the PPAC committee to solicit some ideas. We're still in draft mode, and then I think Leanne was in on the call or the virtual meeting, and she asked me to sort of share this information with everyone here, which is probably a good idea from the standpoint of my impression is most of the people that are probably on the call today aren't necessarily PennDOT people or engineering consultants, although they are on there. And this is probably a resource that could help you all as far as the active transportation standpoint goes. And as I get into this, hopefully it'll be apparent with some of this stuff. What I was going to go over, I'm going to give you an overview of what we're calling the DM2 rewrite. There is a design manual 2 out there now that's a highway design manual. We're rewriting the entire manual. And then give you a brief overview of what we're planning on covering with the pedestrian facilities chapter. It's still in draft and we're still working on it. And then third, I'm adding this on here. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I thought I'd make everyone aware of it. There's new American with Disability Act guidelines out right now. There was a final rule done on these. We're currently reviewing these right now and seeing. We're going to try to work this in with the pedestrian chapter, but I thought it might help everyone just so you're aware of it. I'll probably breeze through this part here. So quick an overview of the DM2. So right now, what you see on the left here that's the current design manual. Part 2, it's called Publication 13M. The M is for metric, so there's metric and English units in it. And we're transitioning over to the manual that you see on the right. So eventually the one on the right is going to replace everything on the one on the left. The way we're doing this is as we're finalizing a chapter, we are publishing it in the manual on the right, and then we're putting a little note in the manual on the left saying, go see the new manual. Purpose of the design manual 2, and we call it DM2. It's providing basic design guidance for PennDOT engineers or engineering consultants working on there. So it's the design manual. So if you want to know how wide a lane should be, you go to the DM2. If you want to know what's the minimum width for a sidewalk, you're going to go to DM2. So the second part here, not the purpose of DM2. It's not a planning manual or a policy direction manual. There are other manuals to handle that. Although we usually discuss that a little bit, just like Jeff was talking about complete streets. We have a context chapter that we're talking about complete streets, and we're also talking about telling the designer how they need to look at different modes and things like that. So there's a little bit of policy and planning in there, but it's mostly we're dealing with design parameters. The chapter is actually organized into 5 different groupings here. The upfront chapters talk about context, modal needs, complete streets is mentioned in there, and design controls. And then the second part is the type of project from a PennDOT perspective. What do you mean project type? Is it a new construction project, or is it a reconstruction project, or pavement preservation, that sort of thing? We have a number of chapters dealing with design details. So it's one of these projects up here, but are you trying to do road diet, or you want to look at maintenance or protection of traffic, drainage, that sort of thing? And then this is fairly new for the DM2. We have modal chapters. Right now, the current one does have a pedestrian chapter, but we've also expanded that. We have a bicycle facilities chapter. All the modal chapters are published right now, and you can go to them. The only one we have left in the modal considerations is the pedestrian chapter. And then there's specialty areas if you're interested in traffic calming. We have a new parking chapter. There was never a parking chapter before. Emergency escape ramps, these sort of things. This is a layout of the chapters. This is just color coding. Chapters 1 through 5 are red because those are the latest ones we published at the end of September. But most of the chapters are published. If you see white, that means it's still in draft form. And if you see something like CT1, that's part of PennDOT's, whenever they're revising a publication, they go through several steps. One of them is once you have a draft one you're comfortable with, they put out what's called a clearance transmittal. It's sent out to the districts and Federal Highway and several others, and they provide written comments, and then we go through and respond to the comments. So there's a clearance transmittal 1 and there's a clearance transmittal 2 sometimes. So if it's under clearance transmittal, it's getting close to being published. The modal chapters, and I thought I just mentioned this again from an active transportation standpoint, you may not be aware of these. One of the first chapters we published is the bicycle chapter. It's out there, it's available. This is all under one publication. I'll show you how to get to it in a second. But this shows all the different parameters PennDOT looks at from a design perspective for bicycle facilities. And I do have to mention the new DM2 compared to the old DM2. The old DM2, I would say, if you're picturing a design manual, it looks exactly like that. We'll just say it's boring and there's tables and graphs, but it's more or less just typeset and a lot of narrative and things. We've tried to make the new one very easy to read. We have call-out boxes. Trying to put as many graphics to illustrate things as much as possible, so it's a little easier on the eyes, and we're trying to organize it so it's very easy for people to look at. So there's a bicycle chapter, there is a transit chapter. Transit facilities mostly dealing with transit stops. Again, this is a roadway design manual, so we're dealing more with the integration of transit along the roadway, so stops, how to design stops, things of that nature. There's a freight facilities chapter. This is a plain people community considerations chapter, which you may not know what that means. That's more or less we're dealing with horse and buggy type of situations. I think we're either the first or the second DOT to put something out like that. And there are special considerations when we're in part of the Pennsylvania dealing with the Amish or the Mennonite communities with how they move around. Also, traffic calming. There's a traffic calming handbook PennDOT has right now. What's going to happen is once we're complete with this chapter, it's going to become part of this document, and it's not going to be a separate document. So dealing with parameters with traffic calming. And like I said, too, we have road diet chapters. So these are the type of things you might be interested in from an active transportation standpoint. To find this, it's fairly simple. If you just Google PennDOT publications, the first hit you'll get is the PennDOT site. You go to that, and there's a parameter to select just publications, and then hit search. This is the new DM2 update that we're updating, and this is the old one here down below it. You can just click on that. They're PDFs. You can download them and see it. This is how the table of contents looks in the new document. If there's a chat, this is dated. I haven't updated this lately, but basically if something is grayed out, we haven't added that chapter yet. And then if it's bold, we do have that chapter in there. So if you're interested, very easy to download and take a look at it. So a quick overview of what we're doing in the pedestrian facilities chapter. These are the main chapter sections as of right now. And again, it's a draft. We have several groups looking at these things, giving us comments, and it can change. 13.1 and 2 are more or less the upfront stuff. We're usually looking at design vehicles, but from a pedestrian standpoint, we're looking at people, design parameters, and then land use. Land use is important. Obviously, an urban situation for pedestrian facilities is going to be different than a rural situation for pedestrian facilities. With all this, also, we have to deal with the American with Disabilities Act compliance. Most of PennDOT's ADA compliance information is going to be in this chapter. And like I said, they just updated some of this stuff, so we have to go back and review this. Pedestrian facility design, that's more or less sidewalks or shared path lanes, whereas crossings are, as you would think, crosswalks. Shoulder considerations and also transit considerations are in this chapter also. And this is more of a breakdown of the different sections. As I was mentioning, pedestrian facilities, we are covering sidewalks, but we're also covering shared youth paths, shared streets, that sort of thing. And then crosswalks, what all we can do with crosswalks and what have you. So just to give you a picture of that. Like I said, the first section we're talking about, our design vehicle, our people, giving just general parameters to people as far as when we're talking about sidewalk width, why do we need a certain amount, and try to give just an overview of that, and also characteristics of a pedestrian, depending on the age and things like that. So we provide information like that to the designer. Like I said, we're trying to update the DM2 to make it a lot easier for people to use. Again, if you go in there now, especially with the American with Disability Act stuff, it's difficult if you don't know where to look and get the information that you need. This is just an example of a curb ramp, and just being able to provide the basics of what's needed for a curb ramp, and trying to illustrate that through graphics and photos and these sort of things is what we're striving for with the DM2 update. Again, this is a design manual. So there's, I've been working with this for a number of years now, which means when you're dealing with this stuff, I get the advantage of getting to work with the chief counsel's office on whatever we're putting in the design manual. So this is one thing that we have in there, pedestrian access or a PAR. That's a generic term for sidewalk or a shared use path, that sort of thing. I know a lot of times we would like sidewalks to be wider and things like that. And when I'm dealing with a design manual, I have to give design parameters. We do have language in there from the designer standpoint, should be working with it to determine what the appropriate size is, but a lot of times we're just giving minimums and maximum type of parameters there. So this is the basic requirements for a sidewalk. As far as designing, 5 foot minimum sidewalk width, the amount of cross slope on the sidewalk, things of that nature. Also, what's big with American with Disability Act is there are certain times when you have to update a facility to match ADA requirements, and there are certain times where you don't. We call that alterations. Whenever you are doing enough work on a roadway project where you have to make sure you are complying with ADA, we call that an alterations. If you're doing basic maintenance, you don't have to update the facility. This is a big deal when we're scoping projects and things, so we're trying to lay it out as simple as possible for the designer to figure it out. The easiest way, if you want to think of it in your mind, is a maintenance project. If you're going and you're filling in potholes, that's considered a maintenance project, and you don't have to worry about updating curb ramps or pedestrian signals or anything like that. If you're doing more than that, you're doing like a total resurfacing of the roadway or something like that, then you do have to go in and update your disability ADA compliance. So it's important to define parameters like this for the designer. Like I said, trying to give them basic, easy to follow ways of approaching a curb ramp and the transition with a roadway profile. That's what this is all about. And the idea is when you have a curb ramp, you want to match the slope of the roadway to a certain percentage, and the maximum slope is 2% cross slope. This number is actually changing with the new final rules that are coming out. Also, trying to educate the designer on you're not just laying a sidewalk. There are different zones as far as the sidewalk, especially in an urban area. So we're giving guidelines on the enhancement buffer zone and the pedestrian through zone, so they realize it's just not a sidewalk. You want to make sure it's comfortable, and you're going to have street furniture or other zones that are going to eat into that pedestrian through zone. So you want to design for that also, which the current DM2 doesn't do. So for the enhancement buffer zone, this is the idea. We put guidance boxes in. We figure people will pay attention to the guidance boxes instead of reading the chapter, the narratives. So we're giving parameters as far as for the enhancement buffer zone, you want at least a minimum of 4 feet. If there's trees, you want to go for 6.5 feet. So we're giving all these parameters here to the designer. And then for the pedestrian through zone or the pedestrian access route, giving them their parameters that they need to look at as far as what they're doing. Again, depends if they're in an urban zone. PennDOT now breaks areas into 5 different context land uses: urban, urban core, rural town, and suburban. We have 5 of them now. So depending on where you're at with these, you want to follow certain things like that. Also trying to highlight some of the things that aren't in there right now, talking about the high visibility crosswalks with the gateway treatment type of signing you want to look at for something like that. Also curb extensions, giving parameters to design curb extensions. It's kind of hard to find that stuff right now in the current DM2, so we're laying all that out, what they need to consider there. A lot of talk about exclusive pedestrian signals, intervals, or leading pedestrian intervals. We're trying to give the designer parameters to consider as they're looking at these type of features with their design. Raised crosswalks, again, there's nothing in the design manual now about raised crosswalks, so giving design parameters for that. Mid-block pedestrian crossings, what you can do or can't do in Pennsylvania as far as mid-blocks, the actual design of those. With that, one thing that comes up, there's a certain type of pedestrian signal called a hawk signal. In other states, they're actually illegal. Here in Pennsylvania, they're still illegal in Pennsylvania, so we're not having that in the design manual. The Chief Counsel Office doesn't like us to put illegal things in design manuals, so we watch that. So those are the basic parameters with that. I'm going to go through this really quick, but I thought, again, I think it's important for this group just to know this. If you deal with ADA, some new things are happening here. And of course, had a nice draft chapter, and then this stuff came out, so now we have to go back and rewrite some things. So the way ADA stuff works, you may or may not be aware of this. There is something called the Access Board, Government Access Board, that looks at all ADA items and provides guidelines. From a roadway perspective, they have different subsets of things. From a roadway perspective, the guidelines we're interested in are called the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines, and of course we have to acronym that to PROWAG. So anything dealing with ADA from a roadway perspective falls under PROWAG. So draft guidelines came out in 2011, and they've been draft ever since. So we've been using draft guidelines because they never finalized them for the past 12 years. And then in August, they finally did a final rule on these things, and they changed some things. Now, the way this works is they publish these things, they publish them, final rulemaking. From our perspective, US DOT and Department of Justice will review these, and then they will issue a final rule as to, yes, you're going to do this or that or what have you. Right now, PennDOT is reviewing all these right now. And I would say, as far as the new stuff goes, pretty sure 95% of this stuff is going to go through. But there are certain things in there where we need more clarification on and things like that. So what we're probably going to do with the PED chapter is we're going to go through this stuff, and the stuff we say, yes, this is going to go through, we're just going to incorporate it in it. A couple things, biggest impacts, and again, some of you may not care about any of this at all. Some of you might be very interested in. APS, I'll talk about that in a second. That's access pedestrian signals. How we treat pedestrian roundabout crossings in multi-lane roundabouts, again, not an everyday occurrence, but they do come up with new parameters for that. Separation at no pedestrian crossings. I am going to cover that one. Previously, for ADA type of things, if you needed additional right-of-way, it was considered you could have a waiver. They're no longer saying that. If you need additional right-of-way to meet the ADA compliance, they're saying that's no longer a constraint, and you have to think about that. And then there's a number of minor tweaks. I'm going to skip a couple of these slides, but just wanted to let you know. If you're interested online, this is where it's located, and I'm going to post that in the chat. So if you just want a link to where all this stuff is, this is a nice summary on this page here, but it'll link you to other PROWAG stuff if you're interested. Like I said, one of the big deals on our end is right-of-way is no longer considered a site constraint. So a lot of times people would get waivers because they didn't have the right-of-way to do whatever they wanted to do. They're saying that's no longer a constraint. So if you have an issue with a certain area and it doesn't work from an accessibility standpoint, this is no longer an issue. We are going to have to wait for a review from DOT on this, on how they're want to look at this as far as additional right-of-way. New construction vertical alterations. They are now saying if you have a new construction project, you're expected to be in full compliance with the ADA guidelines. That wasn't necessarily the case before, but now if they're pushing more for compliance with all this stuff. This is some minor stuff. There's a lot of different changes with curb ramps as far as the parameters go. The maximum cross slope right now is 2%. They're raising it to 2.1. So a lot of the engineering detail, and I'm just going to skip over these. Clarification on curb ramps. There's always a little ambiguity. if you think about a sidewalk going across the driveway, where it flares up meeting the sidewalk, is that considered a ramp or a curb ramp, or no? They're making more clarification with that. The big deal from a PennDOT or a DOT perspective is accessible pedestrian signals. They are saying they want, whenever you have a pedestrian signal, they want you to make it an accessible pedestrian signal. And what that means is the special activation buttons or passive detection needs to be worked into it. They're pushing for audible and vibro-tactical walk indicators. So this is your word for the day, vibro-tactical, and a bunch of different requirements as far as the pedestrian signals. This is a big deal from a PennDOT perspective. I wouldn't say we're going to break the bank or anything, but this can add an additional cost if you have a new signal intersection going in, or again, if you're doing an alteration, then you have to update all this stuff to a signal. So you have latching buttons, the APS system itself. So for a typical 4-leg intersection, they're saying, you're adding an additional $13,000 cost at least, but also you can have a situation where the controller and the software for the signal needs to be upgraded to put this in there. So a lot of questions with this one right now, but it's out there. Again, more with ProAg with some of this stuff. Just playing around with different parameters where the button location should be located in this diagram. That hatched brown area is the area that is the proper place to be putting this stuff. Crosswalk at roundabouts, like I said, they're changing some rules as far as roundabout and how to handle crosswalks from visual impaired standpoint. And this is a big one. We think it's a big one at least, and it's going to make some people happy and it's going to get some people angry. So wherever you have pedestrian crossings are prohibited, so no pedestrian sign somewhere. To be truthful, we usually are to do that whenever we have a sight distance issue, and there's no signals or something of that nature. That's the protective pedestrian because sight distance from the cars or something. It would probably be fair to say there's probably a bunch up there where the designer just didn't want to bother with trying to do some type of pedestrian crossing for whatever reason. But what they're saying now is if you have it as prohibited, you have to do one of two things. You either have to separate it from the roadway with landscaping or other non-prepared surface, so need some type of buffer zone put on there, or you need separated from a roadway by a detectable vertical edge treatment. Don't ask me what a detectable vertical edge treatment is, but so we just can't put up no pedestrian crossing signs. That's what it really boils down to. And again, some stuff about DWS. Horizontal openings, they used to have restrictions just on grates, but now they're saying any horizontal opening. Again, nothing major. ADA for stairs, they have some new rules for stairs, so that's in there. So just want to briefly touch on those, and just so you know that you're aware of that. So with that, I will stop, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask.
Great. Thanks so much for that presentation, Keith. Very informative, and we will give it a little bit of time here to see if we have some questions. I did have one question for you.
Yeah.
You had mentioned, I believe, that the PennDOT Traffic Calming Handbook would become part of the DM2 Traffic Calming chapter.
Right.
When that's published. Do you know how the Smart Transportation Guidebook will be integrated, or will it be, does this complement it, or will DM2 replace it?
No, the Smart Transportation Handbook will, so there's the Traffic Calming Handbook, that's a separate PennDOT publication. And then there's a Smart Transportation Guidebook that I believe Jeff had shown on one of his slides. Those are two separate publications. It's just been decided the traffic calming handbook should be part of DM2. So we're just sliding that in. We're rewriting it, but it's going to be part of DM2. But the smart transportation is still a separate publication.
All right, thanks, Keith.
Hey, Keith.
Yeah.
Don DeAndrea here.
Hey, Don.
Good. How are you?
Good.
If you go back to your slide where you're showing all the chapters.
Yeah.
I guess I'll
reshare that.
I guess I thought there was going to be a separate chapter entitled Complete Streets. I guess where is most of the Complete Streets narrative or guideline going to be housed? I mean, is it if you go back to that slide, is it going to be in one of those chapters?
There isn't a Complete Streets chapter per se. We talk about Complete Streets in chapter 1, which is context-based design, but there isn't an actual Complete Streets chapter. We talked about the concept of it there.
Is there going to be PennDOT narrative and guideline or reference to other guidelines with regard to Complete Streets?
I believe in every one of these chapters, we have a reference section up front. And the idea is instead of putting references in the back and no one ever looks at them, right at the beginning of the chapter, we're saying, okay, these are your references for the information that we're covering in there. I believe we have a couple context Complete Street references in there. I would have to check, though. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
We do have a comment.
Jason asked for, can we have a link for the updated pub? I will put that in the, I will upload that link in there for you. Yes.
Great, thanks.
Anything else? Okay. Thanks, Leanne. Appreciate the offer.
You're welcome. Thank you again. It's very informative. I appreciate your time.
Sure, no problem.
All right, so we'll move on the agenda to our next presentation, which will be on the EPA Climate Reduction Program Implementation Grants Overview, presented by Catherine Tully with SPC.
Okay, thanks, Leanne. I'm just going to go ahead and get my slides set up here.
All right, take your time.
Okay, are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just stay off camera and start presenting, and then I'll come back on camera and answer any questions at the end. So I just want to say, too, there were some great presentations today, and it's a tough act to follow today. But hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Tully. I'm SPC's Manager of Environmental Programs, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about the 2 EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grants that we're working on, the planning grants and the implementation grants. Okay, I can get my slides to work. All right, so just a little bit of information about this grant program. So this is a 2-part grant program from EPA. We have a planning grant that SPC received earlier this year, $1 million planning grant to develop what EPA is calling broad, flexible regional climate pollution reduction strategies. And then there's also a competitive grant program to implement similarly broad, flexible strategies from the planning stages that could be implemented by a range of eligible entities. And that particular program is broken out into a $4.3 billion nationwide competitive grant program for states, local governments, and territories, and then a smaller $300 million package for tribes and territories. So a little bit of a status update on where we are at with these grants. For the SPC planning grant side of things, we issued our RFP for consultant support back in August. The proposals were due in October. Throughout October and November, we went through the interview process. Our consultant team, which is HDR and eHoldings for the public engagement side of things, were selected in late November, and we're in the early stages of getting that work underway. We will be convening a steering committee. So the steering committee for our climate action plan will be members from each of our 10 counties plus the city of Pittsburgh, plus a representative from the Department of Environmental Protection. And then we will be convening a larger advisory committee, and those meetings are scheduled to be starting later this month and then in January. And so the big thing that everyone's talking about right now is the priority, or you can think of it as a preliminary climate action plan, which I'll refer to as the PCAP, which is due to EPA on March 1st of 2024. Okay. So some goals of this program, as the previous slides mentioned. So the EPA is looking to implement ambitious, actionable emissions reduction measures that will achieve significant and cumulative GHG reduction emissions by 2030 and beyond. So the first phase of these implementation grants are looking at a 5-year period of emissions reductions, and then following that, emissions reductions through 2030. They are similarly also looking to achieve substantial community benefits, such as reduction of criteria and hazardous air pollutants, specifically focusing on low income and disadvantaged communities using the Justice 40 criteria. They're looking for programs that will pursue innovative policies and programs that are replicable and can be scaled up across multiple jurisdictions. And I highlighted this and kind of called it out because I want to remind everyone in this forum today, what do we do best in Southwestern PA? We showcase the innovative regional coordination and cooperation. These can complement other funding sources to maximize these GHG reduction measures and community benefits. This funding has a specific requirement to be stacked with other funding sources through the IIJA and IRA funding programs, statewide funding, philanthropic funding, so on and so forth. So we're particularly asking folks to think about the energy communities benefit, the IRS energy tax credits, and other funding sources from the IIJA and IRA bills. So I would particularly refer you back to Sam's slides from earlier today for some funding inspiration. And one thing I'd like to just call out in relation to this grant program is that we've received some incredibly high praise regionally from the Department of Energy for our regional coordination, particularly that, with the number of governments that we have in our planning region, that we can accomplish the intergovernmental cooperation that we have been able to achieve so far. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward when you start thinking about the coalition application option for this grant program. Okay, so the timeline for this is right now we're in the process of basically getting the word out and discussing potential projects with potential project sponsors. We are asking potential sponsors to reach out to SPC by December 15th to ensure participation in our PCAP process. We're planning to hold a project sponsor workshop in mid-January. We're planning to have some speakers such as Partners for Work, Sustainable Pittsburgh, and others to talk about the workforce development and intergovernmental coordination aspects of this grant program. For sponsors, their EPA is requesting that you submit an optional but recommended notice of intent to apply to EPA by February 1st. The following deadline for that, our PCAP will be due to the EPA on March 1st. The implementation grant applications are due the following month on April 1st. And where these two programs tie together is that any project that is proposed for the implementation grant program must have its emissions reduction measure or strategy included in SPC's regional PCAP. So that's where, this coordination is important, and we need to be working with potential project sponsors who are applying for implementation grants to make sure those emissions reduction measures are included in our PCAP. So I'll just repeat that one more time. The award notifications are expected to be sent out in July of 2024, and then funds are expected to be awarded in October of 2024. And I do want to make a note for some of you, may have seen the email that we sent out through our SPC newsletter and a few other sources. I think there are a few folks on the call for whom I probably owe an email or a return phone call. So I thank you for your patience as I'm working through the overwhelming response that we've had to this. Okay, so just a little overview here of the funding tiers for this program. This is expected to be a very, very competitive grant program nationwide. There's going to be a number of awards. They're saying anywhere from 30 to 50 awards 30 to 115 awards over these 5 funding tiers. So that's where what we have been advised from DEP is that EPA is particularly looking to preference coalition applications. The phrase that I've been using in these different meetings is go big or go home. So think big. The EPA is not necessarily wanting to fund what I would call nickel and dime projects. So the more projects that folks can bundle together under one application, whether that's an individual application or a coalition application, we think those will be the more likely applicants to be funded. Okay, so a little bit about eligible applicants, and I took these slides from a previous EPA presentation, and these slides are available on the CPRG website. So eligible applicants are government entities, so that would be state and territorial agencies, municipalities, air pollution control agencies, tribal consortia, and coalitions. An individual applicant can be a single entity leading the design and implementation of the measures, or you can participate in a coalition application, which must include a memorandum of agreement. And there are full details about those requirements in the CPRG implementation grants NOFO. Okay, and I do want to make a note here. So for these coalition applications, because we've had a lot of interest from private entities, nonprofits, and some quasi-governmental entities, like such as a regional authority, those entities are not eligible applicants, but can partner through a coalition application and be subgranted under a lead applicant who is an eligible entity. Okay, so sorry, if this one had. Okay, so applications can be from, an entity such as, one of the MPOs that had applied for the planning grant. At this time, SPC is not planning to be an applicant for the implementation grants because we want to give preference to other entities in our region who are project sponsors. See here, so GHG measures in an implementation grant application under this. Let's see, I think I lost my place, guys. My apologies. So GHG measures in an implementation grant application under this general competition, as I noted previously, must be included in an applicable PCAP. I do just want to make a note. It's fairly unlikely that any folks on this call would be proposing projects outside our region, but projects for this application must fall within the boundaries of the SPC planning region for the purposes of this grant. And as noted previously, coordination and communication between applicants for this and SPC for a PCAP is encouraged. Okay. So some types of GHG emissions reduction measures that can be eligible for funding under this program. There's kind of a mix of things, and it gives it some flexibility. So you could be proposing a new standalone GHG reduction measure that would be implemented solely through the CPRG funding. It can be an expansion of an existing emissions reduction measure. So, a project that you already have in progress, but you need to get extra funding to expand it or to complete the program. Or it can be a completely new project for which you have already secured partial funding and you would need CPRG funding to complete it. Okay. So just as a reference for folks, because this can be a little bit, arcane to wrap your head around, like what would be a correct project that would, equate to an emissions reduction measure. It can be a little bit new to wrap your head around. So the EPA went through all of the published climate action plans in the country and pulled those into a database where you can go through and search projects by sector, by emissions reduction type, so on and so forth. There's a state and both a state and a local version. So I would encourage folks to go on there to the website and take a look at it for some potential project ideas. Okay. And just to relate this back to transportation, some potential projects, this was also presented at our Transit Operators Committee. And, there's obviously a lot of overlap between active transportation and transit service. So some of you may have seen these slides already, but, you can think of, programs that will increase the share of electric vehicles or electric vehicle charging infrastructure, electrification, for equipment fleets, so on and so forth. the introduction of policies to support transportation management incentive programs, anything that will reduce vehicle trips, expand transit use. I caught up bicycle facilities here in the slide, for folks in this audience, expanding active transportation infrastructure, incentive programs, things like that. I would love to see, maybe something like what Denver did. I think Scott Berker said this to me. Denver's very successful e-bike rebate program. That's a potential project that we could propose under this funding. So we can talk about that after today's meeting. Okay, so application limits. This is where, again, it gets a little bit creative, and some of these different combinations of application types are something that I think we'll probably be hammering out some of these details at our project sponsor workshop in January. An eligible applicant may submit one application as an individual applicant, submit one application as the lead applicant for a coalition, or serve as a coalition partner on multiple applications. So, I'll leave it up to folks in the audience to do the string diagram to figure out, who's going to participate on what application. But we will, have to get this ironed out, before April 1st to decide who's going to be doing what. And I do want to mention that EPA will not be awarding implementation grants for the same measure in the same location. So that's where this additional communication and coordination comes into play. So this is just a quick slide showing the scoring rubric for the grant applications. Make a note that there's a high score placed on the impact and quantification of the GHG reduction measures. We have had some requests already from potential project sponsors asking for assistance with the technical analysis for this. And that's something that we can discuss on a case-by-case basis, but we should have some support available for that. And then again, just to reiterate, there is a focus on benefits to environmental justice communities, lower income and disadvantaged communities. There's a large focus on workforce development and entities' programmatic capability and past performance. And then they will be looking very closely at your budget. So a couple of notes on the coalitions and the memorandum of agreement. I'm not going to go into detail and read this whole slide. I would say if you think that you will be a participant on a coalition application through one of our local governments, so far I can say that the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County are interested in serving as the lead applicant for a coalition application. So if you think that you will be participating as a coalition partner, please take a look at the NOFO and read the requirements for the memorandum of agreement for those applications. So there's a little bit of information here on how to apply. I'm just going to go ahead and skip through this one. Keep in mind, if you are planning to be a coalition partner, if you are not already registered on SAM.gov and grants.gov, you might want to take a look at the requirements for those and get signed up now just to be safe. And I've been showing this slide in some of these different meetings just as a little bit of a visual reminder as to why we're doing this. Whatever your personal opinions are about the reasons for climate change, I don't think any of us can argue about the fact that we are starting to see effects of it regardless, and that there is an enormous financial cost associated with these types of natural events. Just a couple of examples. For example, the sinkhole bus, that issue that was, I believe, $536,000 to repair. The Fernhella Bridge collapse was $25.3 million. There's a significant cost with each of these events, and whatever we can do now to mitigate those, it's in our best interest to do so. So, okay, here's my contact information. If you have any questions about this program, please feel free to get in touch. I'm doing my very best to get caught up on all of the interest that we've had so far. So I will absolutely make sure that you're in the queue and added to the contact list for the project sponsor workshop in January. And I'm happy to answer any other questions today. Thanks.
All right, thanks so much for that overview, Catherine. Does anyone have any questions for Catherine at this time? All right.
I do, actually.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious, I didn't catch to what extent are these funds could be used for a wide range of activities. Does that include planning to make the activities happen? In other words, is it just for design and implementation, or is it also the network development sort of precursor stuff? from a transportation perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, Samantha. Thank you for asking that. Based on what we have been told so far, they are looking to preference what they're calling shovel-ready projects. So something that is more ready to be implemented rather than like doing like a feasibility study. They want to fund something that's going to have a quantifiable emissions reduction. So I would say it's probably more preference towards projects that are already underway or partially in progress.
Right, but also programs. So could it be for like with transportation demand management or expansion of encouragement for people to shift modes? Could that also be for staffing to make programs like that happen?
Definitely, yeah. There is an option to apply for administrative purposes. So like if you're looking to expand a program, increase staff for an office to improve implementation, things like that, then that would qualify.
Okay, one last question. It sounds like Allegheny County and City of Pittsburgh are talking about being umbrella for a coalition. Are other counties within the SBC region, or is SBC planning to help with this communication and coordination question? Like how people know whether other people are also coming up with proposals for overlapping things, either overlapping topic or overlapping location?
Okay, yeah. So we're definitely like actively involved in the coordination of the potential projects that are being proposed. We have been in communication with our counties. I know outside of Allegheny County, we have at least 2 other counties that are interested or have potential projects in those counties. So we're still kind of working on getting all this coordinated. And at least right now, the intent is that at the project sponsor workshop in January, we'll be able to kind of finalize some of these questions as to who's doing what, who's willing to be a lead applicant and so forth. And then, that we're expecting to have that workshop sometime the week of January 8th. We're still nailing down our speaker schedules. And then we'll have time, between then and March 1st to finalize the listing of projects at our PCAP. And then there will be an additional month after that for folks to finalize their implementation grant applications.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Catherine, this is Jason Theakston. Real quick question. Are there any plans for like PennDOT or larger like divisions in the region to submit any applications like for CMAQ projects or anything like that would be eligible? There's an opportunity here for, I would think for bundling some of those larger projects that they're doing under this program. I'm just curious about something that's been explored.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm very glad that you asked that. So we have had some interest from PennDOT for at least one project involving like a lower emissions asphalt material. And, the question came up and I had to kick it back to, their folks to take to the central office staff that, it doesn't make as much sense to do like one small project for one PennDOT district, but if all 3 districts could, band together as a coalition application and bundle projects, exactly like you said, for our region, that would make sense. Or, PennDOT could even think about doing a coalition application, for all of the districts or just one statewide, application. So some of this is going to depend on how PennDOT leadership wants to handle it. But I do think, having the district offices do a coalition application in our region would be an option. And that could cover multiple projects. And just for the benefit of the other folks on the call, that's some of the discussions we've been having has been centered around bundling projects. So, it doesn't make sense to propose one small project and try to get it funded for such a competitive program. But the more potential projects that you could bundle under one application to get the most emissions reductions possible is what I think will get attention from EPA.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions for Catherine? All right, hearing none. Thanks so much for that overview. We'll go ahead and jump back to the agenda. Which next on the agenda is roundtable updates. So if anyone has anything they'd like to share, we'll open that up right now. Feel free to jump in and share an update that your community is working on. I always say I'll give a minute for that, but a minute is a very long, quiet time on a virtual meeting. We also have future meeting dates listed there. And then lastly, before we adjourn, just remind you to stay plugged in with us. Follow us on social media. And hearing no updates or further questions, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much for attending today. And thanks to our speakers.